All right, hey guys. I'm going to send you a reading as well, but I wanted to kind of walk you through what I thought are some of the most important things about the circulatory system to keep in mind. So I just wanted to sort of show you this overview of what we call the double circulation or this double circulatory system that we have. And so if you look at this, you have two sides of the heart. And one of the really interesting things to notice is that whenever you look at a diagram of the heart, you're looking at a heart as if you were looking at somebody. And so you're going to notice that on, the left side of your heart is the right side of the left side of your drawing is the right side of the heart, right? And that's like if you were looking at somebody, my right side of my heart is on the left side of your image. So there's sort of the two loops are generally one going to the lungs and then one going to the body. And so if you look at the right side of the lung, blood always enters through this top chamber, the atrium, and then goes down to a ventricle, and then it actually leaves sort of up through the top of the heart. And so the right side of the heart, you're going to see it pumps out, splits into two because it's going to the two lungs. And then it comes back into the left side of the heart. And so that's the one circuit, right? So you have this one circuit that goes to the lung and then back to the heart. And then, you'll notice that what happens in the lungs is that the blood is oxygenated. So you've got oxygen that enters the blood. And then so coming back into the left side of the heart, again, enters through the top chamber, goes down, goes out, and then splits a bunch of different times. But, part of the blood goes up to the head and the, upper part of the body. And then a bunch goes to the lower part of the body. And then this breaks off into every single organ, into every single place that you have cells. So, I always say that near every cell, you have to have a capillary. And so these are going to just break into, I don't know the number, but like thousands, potentially a lot of capillaries. And then in the capillaries, that oxygen is going to be dropped off, and then CO2 is going to be picked up, and we're going to look at that in a second. But so just in generally, so that's your second loop, is going from the left side, going to the body, and then coming back into the right side. And then essentially on the loop to the lung, blood is oxygenated, and then the loop to the body, blood is deoxygenated. And so I'll ask you kind of generally to look for, instead of trying to memorize all of these things, just the trends of, the two sides are the same, atria to ventricles. And then you'll notice that out of the ventricles, you go to an artery. And so even in the reading that I'm going to send you, it says, blood in arteries is oxygenated except for the pulmonary artery. And I just like to think of arteries are the vessels going away from the heart. And so even though, we think of, the aorta branches into all these other arteries going to, the liver and the intestine and blah, 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 like all these different places. An artery just means it's carrying blood away from the heart. So the pulmonary artery is carrying blood away from the heart to the lungs. And then coming back to the heart, right, from either loop is a vein. And then the vessels to and from the body always kind of have these special names. So the aorta is the artery going to the body. And then the vena cava is the vein coming back from the body. And there's one coming from the bottom. And then there's a superior vena cava coming from the top. And then the two vessels to the lungs are really easy. Pulmonary is related to the lungs. So the artery goes to the lungs, the pulmonary vein goes back from the lungs. So if you can remember kind of like, what sides did or to where do the different sides of the heart pump? Left side goes to the body, right side goes to the lung. That will kind of help you keep everything in order. So I just wanted to take a look at a capillary and some other, you might learn about, different structures of arteries and veins. But a really important thing to keep in mind, the capillary, so whether you're talking about capillaries in the body or in the lung, are where the exchange of materials is going to take place. And we actually haven't talked about this much, but actually, really at all. But to say that something diffuses, it basically has this definition that you're moving from high to low concentration. And molecules just do this naturally, where they're concentrated. They don't really have anywhere to go, but in another direction. So let's just think of this as the capillary in the body here for a second. So the capillaries or the arteries and then the capillaries that are going, to tissue in the body, not the lungs, these would be high in oxygen. And so, we could even say, let's say that this is oxygen. It will diffuse out of the blood into these cells, because we can assume that if cells are using oxygen, that they would have a low concentration or a very low amount. So oxygen is just naturally going to flow out of the capillaries into the cells. And then you can imagine that this is, so this is CO2 that's being produced by the cells. So this was oxygen. And I know that a lot of you guys learned about this in ninth grade, but essentially what you have in your cells that is crucial to, it's essentially why we have a circulatory system and why we have a respiratory system. So this is the process of cellular respiration. And so your cells, whatever they're doing, they're going to need ATP. And that's sort of this cellular molecule that you can use for energy. And in order to do that, you need some kind of energy, whether a carbohydrate or a fat or a protein. But this green thing is probably, or I'm gonna say that it's glucose is the type of sugar that's normally floating around in your blood and supplied to cells to provide energy. And if you remember this equation from last year, so this is usually C6H12O6. And so you don't have to use glucose. You can use other things, fats and whatever, but this is why you need oxygen. So you need oxygen as part of this process with glucose. And then in order to make ATP, which is kind of considered an output of this, you're going to get carbon dioxide and water, but water is just everywhere. So this is the process in all of your cells. So I just wanted to remind people of that. This is why you need to breathe, so that your heart can pump blood, that can carry oxygen. But also keep in mind that there's other things in the blood that are really important. So, energy and immune cells and hormones. So a lot of the body systems are hooked up to the blood, because that's how you get things around from one place to the other. If you're talking about, so actually I'm just going to erase this for a second. If you were instead talking about capillaries in the lungs, it would be a different situation. So the molecule that you would have a lot of, in this case, would be oxygen. You have blood that's coming back from the body. So now this would have high levels of CO2. So CO2 would be going into the lungs so that you can breathe it out. And then O2 is coming into your lungs and diffusing into the blood so that it can be carried to the body. But these cells also need, so this could still be glucose. Cells in the lungs still need energy to get ATP to do the things that they're doing. So the direction of diffusion is going to be different, obviously, if you're talking about the lungs or the body. So a couple things, and I'm not going to take you through everything here, but just consider that when you're talking about circulation, it always goes in one direction. So through one loop, then to the other side of the heart, through the other loop, other side of the heart. But then the direction that it flows through the heart is always atrium, ventricle, artery, and then back to the other side of the heart, atrium, ventricle, artery. And then throughout, both in the heart and in the circuits, you have valves which prevent blood from going backwards. So when this heart contracts, it's going to actually push this blood in the ventricle back that will shut this valve, and then blood will have nowhere to go but forward. So blood only has the option of moving one way throughout both of the circuits, and then it will just keep going from one circuit to the next. Okay, so we talked about that. So just a quick note, and I'm not trying to overload you with too much, but just giving you some ideas about kind of how this works. So the heart actually sets its own electrical conduction, and the heart is this really kind of strange mix of it can pass electrical signals like a nerve can, but then it's also a muscle and it can contract, which just means that all those little fibers are going to get shorter and then squeeze, and that's how it works as a pump, right? So the crazy thing is heart cells can generate their own electrical signals. So you have this little patch of cells that is just generating this electrical impulse with a certain rhythm. And so it will set its own rhythm and then sort of pass this, what we call an impulse. So first the atria will contract and push blood down, and then the signal is going to pause. Then it will go down to the bottom of the heart and go up, and then the ventricles will contract. So, right, the heart sets its own pace, and we'll come back to this in a second. You basically have one, what do you call this, phase of the cycle where atria contract, ventricles contract, and then they're both relaxed. And what that does is give time for blood to actually flow back into the heart from the circuit so that you have something to pump the next time around. So the heart's setting its own pace, but there's nervous and hormonal control over the heartbeat. So, the heart is doing its own thing separate from the brain. And then an example of this would be that your brain can regulate your heartbeat. So it can send a message to say, hey, speed up the heart rate or slow down the heart rate. But unless some situation happens where you need to change the heartbeat will set its own rate, or the heart will set its own rate. And then there's also hormones. And the classic example is epinephrine or adrenaline. I don't actually know if you need me to spell that, but so it's the same thing as adrenaline. And this would be in certain situations where, so we say fight or flight, your brain actually signals your adrenal glands to release adrenaline or epinephrine. And then adrenaline actually has a ton of different targets in your body that it will activate. And one of them is this faster heart rate. So I'm also going to, I'm not sure, I was going to give you guys kind of the rundown of respiration. Yeah, I think I'm going to do this later, but I'm going to just show you this. So, your respiratory system, you basically have just a pathway where you're getting air into your lungs. And then if we look at the very end of these tubes, so your bronchi go into bronchioles, and then at the end you have these air sacs called alveoli. And if we looked at these vessels, so you've got a vessel coming in, and so you kind of have to think about, okay, I'm going to have an artery going away from the heart. We'll go into these little arterioles. So these are actually, right, it's coming from an artery, these little arterioles. And then what happens as blood passes through these capillaries, and the capillaries are right next to these air sacs that are going to have more oxygen from the air outside. They will pick up oxygen, so you can see them kind of getting purple and then red. And then these will be the venules that will go to the veins back to the heart. So this is the other side of what it would look like to have capillaries in the lung. So here's this. CO2 diffused out of the blood. So I think that's all I'm going to do for now. And then you can kind of go back through the reading or go back through sections of this to kind of work on this little formative that I'm going to give you guys.